So we're moving on to our next presentation, which is with Diane Denessen from AniMeals, our sponsor today, implementing a feline leukemia adoption program in your shelter and rescue. Diane is the executive director of AniMeals in Missoula, Montana. In 2004, she started fostering for local shelters with a primary focus on cats needing intense medical care. She also began coordinating TNR projects of all sizes. During this time, she worked as a manager in IT for a bank, but eventually realized that she wanted to pursue her passion to be a voice for all cats. In 2015, she was asked to continue the AniMeals mission when the original founder retired. In the last 5 years, the group has been successful in removing barriers to adoption for cats that would previously have been deemed unadoptable. Diane has 6 cats, 4 ducks, 1 sheep, 1 goat, and a colony of about 20 community cats that she cares for. Her favorite hobby is TNR. Diane sounds like our kind of woman. Diane, are you out there?
I am out here.
All right, excellent. Yeah. The show is yours.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This has been very, very exciting for me to see all this interest. Being in Missoula, Montana, it's kind of it has a feeling of being remote. So that's pretty exciting. I'm seeing some of the things that we're doing, others are doing. So it definitely reaffirms, our mission. So, so a little bit about myself, which she had already started into, was in early 2004, I actually started fostering for local veterinarians and local shelters. Most of it was, the primary focus was intense medical, whether it be trauma, upper respiratory, specific medical needs. So that's how I actually got started in, dealing with cats directly, and I loved it. So, so also about that time, I started doing small and fairly large TNR projects, at least large for our area, and so that gave me a huge view into community cats, and all the other aspects that go along with it. In 2010, I was actually fostering 2 sisters that had litters of kittens, and one of the kittens was showing us being anemic, and I had taken it in to have it checked. And one of the veterinarians says, "Boy, I think we should test this for feline leukemia." And so of course, okay. And about 15 minutes goes by, and she comes back. She says, she kind of had this kind of blank look on her face, and she said, it came back as being positive. And I went, oh boy. I remember going through my head at that time that, my first reaction wanted to be to go into complete hysterics. And, but I've learned that hysterics doesn't get me very far. So, so we talked about it briefly, and so the one kitten was tested and another one was tested from one of the moms, and the other one came back negative. By the end of the visit with the veterinarian, she looked at me and she said, "Would you like to euthanize him now?" And I went, I didn't even know what to say. I didn't even know what to say. I'm sure the look on my face was like the blood running out. And I looked at her and I said, not today. So I took him home and frantically spent the next 2 days researching feline leukemia. And, I had been looking frantically for sanctuaries who could take them And I found there wasn't a whole lot of options, but I did learn a lot about it. And I'm really glad at that minute when I was sitting in that veterinary office that I said, not today. I contacted the director at the time about that vet visit and what came of it. So after all the research and calling around and all those other things, we decided to have them retested under the advice of a lot of these people that I had contacted. And so 3 months went by, and they came back negative. And we waited another 3 months, and they still came back negative. And, you know, there's no worse feeling, I don't think, than to, you know, to be a foster and invest that time of energy and the attachment and all those things, and being faced with that very difficult situation. So anyway, ultimately, they all came back negative, and they were all adopted out. And even to this day, I still get updates on 2 of them. So that was my really first exposure to feline leukemia. You know, I'd heard about it, but, you know, not directly up until that point. So I've kind of been on this very somewhat quiet until recently mission to improve their lives as well. So that's a little bit on me. A little bit about AniMeals. AniMeals was actually began as a food bank in 2003. That's all it was. It was never a shelter in the very beginning. In 2007, our local animal control was over capacity by about 28 cats. So, and they were at risk for euthanasia. So basically what happened is they threw a bunch of dog kennels together, and 28 cats came in, and that's how AniMeals became a shelter. In 2015, I actually had been asked by the founder of AniMeals to take over for her when she retired. And at that time, I was a manager for a bank in IT. And so I agreed, and I was very excited about that. And so the most important part when I first started was, how can we, you know, how can we adopt out these feline leukemia cats and FIV and a lot of those other ones. So I really had that in the forefront of my mind when I took over. So in 2015, we started talking about an adoption plan. How could we formulate that? How could we make that a real thing? As a result of a lot of that talking, Gaia's Landing was created. And Gaia's Landing actually is a program very similar to what Merrimack has. And what it does is we cover the medical, for the adopters. We don't just do feline leukemia, we do FIV, diabetics, hyperthyroid, all those things. And Gaia's Landing is very similar in the way that we cover the expenses. We're very medically focused at the shelter. And so we have 2 employees that is their primary focus. And their medical care. And of course, we have other, you know, the kennel technicians, and all of our employees are very medically focused. So Gaia's Landing was created, and we are their medical support. And what I found with talking with potential adopters, and, you know, prior to Gaia's Landing, I had surveyed some of these previous adopters, potential adopters, and had asked them about what they felt their barriers were. most of them, honestly, I truly expected them to say 100% it was financial. But what I found was only about 50% said it was a financial concern. The other 50% was fear. What do I do if this happens? Who do I get a hold of? How do I make these decisions? Those kinds of things. So with Gaia's Landing, we are there with them the entire way. And so we were able to remove those barriers. So that was the very beginning of the adoption plan. If we did start taking them, and how would we get them adopted? So, the adoption plan actually was probably the easiest. In terms of, the housing, we had dedicated one area that we figured out we could do that. And how we could support the adopters and remove those barriers. The biggest challenge is honestly I think what I found and what we found was employee buy-in. Early on, we're actually still not even allowed to say can't and unadoptable here. The employees are hired. When they're hired, we talk a lot about feline leukemia, FIV, some of those that really have had a very strong, stigma to them. So we talk a lot, even during interviews, about how do you feel about leukemia, feline leukemia? What do you know about feline leukemia? And I've had potential employees and employees say, they're going to die right away. So trying to overcome those barriers for us was the very first thing we needed to do, was work within the shelter and then work our way out. I heard, a lot of, I can't, we can't. And, my response always back was, why can't we? And, now it's interesting. Now it's unadoptable. That word never comes up. I don't ever hear anybody say that. And, it's just a matter of finding the right fit. So, building that culture internally was a big deal. And that was actually our biggest challenge. From a medical perspective, as well as, everybody else's experiences, what they knew, what they didn't know, all those things. So the employee buy-in is very important. And the medical, making sure that everybody understands about feline leukemia and what to expect, and from the employees. Oftentimes when you have these, you get very attached and, heroic measures, and, you get to a certain point where you realize the disease is taking over, and working through those. So I really feel like we've built a very good culture here as a result of listening to other groups like Merrimack and Austin Pets Alive. And so then, after we expanded, went beyond the walls of the shelter, the importance of veterinary acceptance. Early on, especially, although, in some areas of Montana, it is still very much frowned upon. And in the area that we're living in right now, where the shelter is, we have a fair amount of veterinary acceptance. Although we have had some that have come in and, have said, if we have a kitten with feline leukemia and they know that, but the kitten has coccidia, which we know is totally treatable. we've been, refused to treat. They would refuse to treat because they didn't agree. So we focused a lot on the veterinarians that we work with, and they knew where we're at and what our mission is. And that's helped us out greatly. Originally the veterinarians, dealing with veterinarians and, the general public, that was part of the can't. We can't because, veterinary acceptance. We don't have veterinary acceptance. And, so that removed all of that. It's also equally as important that I found once, we started to work our way out, then working with other shelters. We actually, feline leukemia is not very common in our area. As a matter of fact, I was just thinking about this the other day I don't think we've taken one positive from our area. All of ours have come from, Montana, we kind of refer to the east and the west side of the mountains, and we're on the west side of the mountains. Most of all the feline leukemia we've ever taken have all come from the east side of the mountains. And so, working with those shelters and building those relationships have, like the other, Merrimack, a few of those other that we're talking about, when we get called to take a FELV positive, we do request that they do a PCR prior, because we have had some come over, and like everyone else, our space is limited, and we have requested that they do a confirmation test, and we have had some where they came back negative, and so that helps us to plan for space and all those kinds of things. So, I kind of briefly, talked about the stigma, and, I heard a lot early on, and it wasn't even until later on in my own experience, in our experience, they're not all sick. And I think that's a stigma surrounding FELV now, is that, not now, but during that time especially, is that they're all sick. So we routine veterinary care, we treat them the same way as we do the others, in terms of, we vaccinate. It's I really appreciated early when Dr. Levy had mentioned about surgeries and later spays and spay neuters and those kinds of things. We did have an experience this last year that we took 13 positive kittens from east of the mountains, and they came over with coccidia and had been transferred from shelter to shelter before they came to us, and there were some refusal of care because they were positive. And when they came over, we addressed those issues, and we did get a few fixed early on. And interesting enough, we ended up losing those guys to FIP. And so I thought that was interesting that Dr. Levy had mentioned that. But we do, and it's interesting also that the things that have been mentioned have been kind of what we have seen also. So it's kind of reassuring to me as well. Educating the staff on FELV and the things to watch for. We spend a fair amount of time, doing similar things, watching podcasts and trying to stay up to date. Austin Pets Alive, when they did their presented here a couple months back, which I greatly appreciated. I did share that with the staff. As a result of all these things, we were able to, the confidence of the staff, and myself included, was had increased to be okay with, you know, this is a good thing. This is a good thing to get them adopted. And, you know, not feel pressured because it's not acceptable to get these guys adopted. And so we feel very good about how far we have come in our confidence level. And I tell the employees a lot that to be confident as if this was your pet. And so we've gone through, you know, several changes through the last few years, but it's amazing how much, especially the staff and the knowledge level, has increased greatly over the last few years. So in the last, you know, in the last 5 years, since 2015, we've been able to place about 25 cats into homes. One of the things I get asked is, you know, our length of stay and the expense of Guys Landing, which is a program that we put them under. And our length of stay has not been very long. It's our length of stay actually has been longer for, you know, cats with cerebellar, diabetics, those feline leukemia cats have not contributed to a very long length of stay. You know, 8 of those 25 are still living and are very healthy. We've been able to, especially in this last year, we're starting to hear, and people are reaching out to us from within the state of Montana with an interest to incorporate adoption strategies for FELV and FIV cats. You know, as far as I know, at least at this point, in the state of Montana, we're the only ones that are doing it. So I'm kind of hoping also that, you know, as time goes on and we have these online, you know, conferences regarding FELV, that we will see more of that, especially on the West Coast, and more of interest in, you know, getting them adopted versus, you know, euthanizing. So there's different methodologies out here in terms of dealing with FELV cats. Some shelters, they test during their spay neuters and make their decisions right there. Some don't test at all. We are one of those ones that don't test. We also have a disclaimer in our adoption that says we do not routinely test unless we have a reason to. And that's been actually very well received. We have, you know, it says, and it also states, if in fact you do adopt and they do come up positive, we will always take them back if for some reason they choose not to, or to keep them, or we put them under our Guys Landing program. Like I said, as far as I know, we're the only shelter in Montana that does take them in. Our very first one actually was a double positive. Her name was Maddie. She was a transfer from another shelter back in 2015. She had just had a litter of kittens, and all the kittens had died within, I think it was like 5 days. They had decided to test her at that time, and she did come back positive, and then we had some retesting done later. IFA, and she did in fact come back positive. She was the very first one to get adopted, and I was very nervous at first about, you know, how do we present this to potential adopters? How do we give them the confidence to see the cat for who they are and not see the virus or what could happen? So, you know, I did a lot of research and modeled after some very, you know, similar things that have been mentioned today of that confidence that we instilled in the employees, we also instill now in our adopters. And Gaia's Landing is considered a permanent lifetime adoption, and we call it with benefits. You know, because we pay for the medical, we have somebody on call for emergencies. If there's any questions, you know, sometimes, you know, of course, we do have restrictions, just like were mentioned with others, is, you know, they do have to have approval to see a veterinarian, and they have to see certain ones, and, you know, those kinds of things. So Maddie was the very first one, and, you know, we were just still trying to formulate that and kind of get a feel for, you know, how it would be received. And one of the things that it was somebody actually that really didn't have a whole lot of experience or previous knowledge of feline leukemia. So it was, in some way, it was easier to explain and with you know, documented facts. I'm very data driven, and so I look for data a lot, and so that's what I use with the adopters. You know, from veterinarians, you know, conferences just like this. So anyway, Maddie was a double positive. She did live for 3 years after adoption, and what it did was, since she was the first one, we really built what I learned to be a bond, not only with the cat itself, but with the adopter. And she lived very healthy. And, you know, the end was actually, quite honestly, quick, from, you know, the time that she actually became sick until then she passed away within like 4 days. And so after that one, that was the proof that there's no such thing as can't. We can, and we did. And so that was the beginning of it. And so these two boys are, we always say, you know, I had always told the employees, and we can't and unadoptable are not in our vocabulary. So these two boys actually came to us about a year and a half ago, and from another shelter, and they're brothers. They have, they weren't here long before they were adopted. They, we ran into, you know, some challenges early on with upper respiratory and, you know, those kinds of things. They, but so anyway, they got adopted, and the adopters that I'm finding they're repeat adopters. We've had some that only lasted a few months and became sick, and they've come back. And so that kind of goes back to that bond. We had over the next couple of slides, you'll see that you know, they stay very healthy, and our length of stay, like I mentioned earlier, is we literally try to get, you know, they come in, we do what we can with them, and get them adopted out as quickly as possible. COVID, like everyone else, kind of forced us to put them into foster. We recently had we only had one in the shelter at the time of COVID, and one of our fosters stepped up and offered to take her, and probably had her about a month and a half. And we had a doctor lined up, a previous adopter lined up, that she had just lost two of them, and was ready to adopt again. And we were so grateful to her. I think the stigma behind they're all sick is, I think these guys are kind of proof that they're not all sick when they come in, and they don't all get sick. We tell adopters a lot that, take care of them. That's the important piece. Low stress, take care of them. So this was Victor and Jack. They're about 1 year old now, and then they tested positive at 8 weeks. We did get confirmation. The shelter that they did come from did not believe in testing beyond the initial test. So we did have them come over, and they did in fact test positive, PCR, and so this is them in their current adoptive home. Ironically, the one on the right, right after he was adopted, approximately a month after he was adopted, he bolted out the door and disappeared. And everybody was frantic. We had employees looking for him. We had, of course, the adopters looking for him. And a month went by, and he was not to be found anywhere. And I remember thinking during that whole period of time is, if somebody finds him, I hope to God they don't take him to a veterinarian and find out he's FELV positive. And that was my greatest fear. I mean, outside of the fact of his welfare, but, I remember thinking, how sad is that I have to worry about that? Happily, good thing, he ended up 1.5 miles away. We suspected he probably jumped onto someone's car and took a ride. And somebody found him in a car dealership. And fortunately, he was microchipped and ended up at our local animal control, and they knew we were looking for him. And, he came back in pretty good health in spite of being missing for a month. I had honestly worried that maybe we would end up with, some major medical due to stress and, no food. He had lost a substantial amount of weight, and his tail was broken. But outside of that, he actually turned out pretty well, and he gained weight quickly, and he settled right in. So. I often, some of especially on the medical side, one of the things that I thought a lot about is, if we didn't have the confidence, to say, these guys deserve a chance, they're not all sick, and if we, within shelters, take away the can't. We honestly wouldn't be looking at pictures like this guy. I mean, it's pretty cute. We at AniMeals definitely feel they're highly adoptable, and if we can, keep continuing to improve our adoptions and how we integrate, especially feline leukemia cats into into households and educate our adopters and be there for them, we have a much greater chance. And, I've heard this a lot from adopters, especially, that, like was earlier, is that, they wouldn't trade it for anything. And they don't focus on, yes, they might have a shortened lifespan. But they may not. We just don't know. And so we're very, very happy about how this has come out, and being able to feel confident, especially out here, because we're kind of remote, to feel confident in where we're going and what we're doing, in that we can get them adopted out, and their quality of life can be just as good as the one that was negative. So that's that's about it. Is there any questions or anything? I certainly do appreciate everyone's input.
Yep. Yeah, Diane, thank you so much. I was so busy. I have to say, I took a little snapshot of that photo with the kitty and the Singer sewing machine. I'm going to put it up on the Facebook group because it's just so gosh darn cute. It makes me think of it makes me think my mother, who passed away about a year ago. She had the sewing machine in her house that was there because she felt like it was 1950s. You're supposed to know how to sew, but she got a D in high school sewing. And so it just sort of, and she loved cats. Yep. And so I was like, oh my goodness, that's such a better purpose for her sewing machine to have the cat in it than her doing the sewing. Anyway, just made me think about my mom. So it's a very cute picture. So
it is a good one. That was taken by the adopter. Yeah, she really takes a lot of photos.
Yeah, well, it's good. We love our kitties, and we definitely love all of that. So I have a question about kind of going back. Obviously, one of the big perceived barriers is veterinary acceptance. And I would have to say, I think maybe some of our other speakers might have comments on this too, but from your perspective, even just over the last 5 or 6 years, have you seen anything that the sort of what we might think were the original biases in the veterinary community with regards to feline leukemia? Are you seeing that changing? Are vets getting a little bit more progressive about feline leukemia?
Oh yeah, oh definitely. I really, like I said earlier on, it was a refusal to treat even coccidia because they were feline positive, which had absolutely nothing to do with the coccidia. And now we are starting to see, instead of the focus of being, okay, they're feline positive, so we might as well just stop here. We're actually starting to see veterinarians and vet techs too. Actually, okay, so that's a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the whole thing. So we're starting to see where they want to treat the cat, the whole cat, and not be so focused on the fact that they're positive. There's been a huge shift in that, I think, in the last, I would say the last couple of years. Originally, originally we got a lot of pushback for doing adoptions. And as a matter of fact, I got a phone call one time from a veterinarian wanting to know why we were doing this, and that it was wrong. And, I had the confidence at that time to say, I understand your concerns, and, but we feel it's, this is a healthy cat, and we feel that they have, they're here too. And so now, ironically, a year and a half later, that same veterinarian called to see if we could take in a feline. It's all in, what I've learned is all leading by example. I haven't done, I like I said, way back when I wanted to go into complete hysterics, over, this mom and the kittens, and I wanted a soapbox and, all those things. And I've just learned that doesn't work. So, so we've been trying to go on the model of lead by example. And so now we are getting calls from those shelters that, didn't agree with doing this. Those veterinarians, those veterinary techs, we're getting those calls now, asking for, whether we can take them, or some ideas or some insights. Or we actually got a referral from 300 miles away from a woman that had a couple of feline leukemia kittens. They unfortunately died at about 9 months, and she wanted to adopt again, but she couldn't find a shelter anywhere that had them. So it was actually a veterinarian that did the referral to us. So, I think a lot of it is leading by example.
Excellent. So since your hobby is TNR, I'm going to talk a little bit about, ask you some questions with regards to TNR. There's a sort of a case scenario here, and I do have a soapbox on this issue, but I won't get on it. I'll let you get on it first. Folks took in a kitty that had an injury. They tested the feral kitty, who came up positive for feline leukemia. The cat was recommending euthanizing the cat. They fostered the cat, healed the cat, and then returned the cat back to the colony. What are your thoughts on that story?
Oh, ouch. I definitely, that's a tough one. What I can't personally, it's hard for me to say, because I haven't personally been in that position. Now, in the FIV cases, we have been in that position where, for whatever reason, they were tested, which we don't test here even during spay neuters. I can actually say I've been faced with that, with feline leukemia. In a case like that, I think depending on the personality of the cat, I think we would try possibly a rehoming situation with feline leukemia. Yeah, that one's a tough one.
And at the end of the story is he is doing fine in his colony,
Okay.
and be monitored.
Oh, sure.
And I'll share the opposite side of the
Sure.
coin, which actually I wrote a blog post, which I'll stick out into the conference group. But we started, we'd never test feline, cats in our spay neuter clinics or anything like that. So we don't intentionally test our TNR cats. But if there does come to a scenario where there has been some testing done, I do believe that it is okay. The key to success is the sterilization part.
Right.
And so that in many cases, cats have already been exposed to the virus, and the cats in that area, if they're gonna have it, they're gonna have it. If they're not, their passing is not a miserable passing, usually too at the end. So as long as their quality of life, and we are trying to reduce their stress levels, and if they are feral, putting them back where they came from in their home is really a low stress return, then that may be the best thing for the virus too, because they're just going back to where they know, as long as they're spayed and neutered ahead of time, obviously. So, I try and always keep it, that TNR is just always that life in that moment. We're in that moment of time, we're just borrowing them, we're snipping them, but we're putting them back, but we're not altering the balance of Mother Nature there. And that's that thing where cat people try to control and not control, and there's that we're trying to be on which side of the line we're on. So that's my little soapbox. But I'll post the article I wrote. It's one of the first intense conversations I had with the MRFRSers that are out there. Liz Pease, who's actually my VA, who was the director of operations at the time, and we had a big conversation around it, and she hadn't really thought about sort of some of those issues. And I'm sure, you know, I need to listen better too, and listen to other perspectives and understanding. But it so far, I mean, we started doing that in the early 2000s. If a scenario like that did happen, and I'd say it maybe happened less than 5 times on my hand here, and nothing came back to sort of bite us in the end, put it that way. And so just, it's always something to not really rack your mind over a test, because it is a moment in time. It's just that moment in time. It's not the big picture for that cat, and that cat's, we don't get a picture of that cat's immune system based on that one test. So I think that as long as it's a managed colony and people are watching out for the cats and they care for the cats and they like the cats and the cat looks good, why do I need to know that that cat had such a test at that particular moment? Because I could take a test tomorrow and it could be totally different, and or you know, down the line, and I'm not going to hold a feral cat for a month's time to retest. That would cause that feral cat to have problems. So that's just sort of the scenario we went through. We did run into that with some cats in Salisbury, Massachusetts, right in the same town where the shelter was, and we decided to release them, and you know, it was also a happy ending. But I think that's a hard one to convince veterinarians that is a viable option, but I do believe it's an option.
Sure. You know, it's you know, like I said, I've never in those years or even now I've been faced with that with FELV, but you know, we have with FIV the ones that we have different counties, and each county has its own policy. And, you know, there was earlier mention about Kansas, and one of their policies is during TNRs, they cannot release a known. And so they do test every single one of them too. All, you know, so, and we have here in our area, when we do TNR, we don't test at all. You know, so, you know, we probably would have been faced with it more had we been, but, you know, it's like you had mentioned, that has been our thought is, you're right, it's just a moment of time. And you know, we just send I mean, why would I want to move them somewhere else? And we've been asked to do that. And because of you know, that test, and it's a tough one, and it seems to vary from, you know, county, state, region, all those. So
I have a question for you. So what arguments would you use to convince a board of directors that investing in a feline leukemia medical care for a lifetime type program is the right thing to do?
Well, I actually, you know, that was a big question, and I did have to present exactly that. You know, the lifetime of care, what we found is, because we do also, you know, take in others, diabetics, megaesophagus, liver shunts, just about everything, blind. And what we found, my argument when I originally presented this whole idea was their eyes got really big and they went, no way, it's going to cost too much. My experience has been that they really don't. And like was mentioned, we get them vetted up front. We do the testing we need to do. You know, occasionally they do have medical issues, but not very often. We've also found, and I didn't know this at the time when I presented it, but we've also found that a lot of these adopters, you know, they'll go, you know, how about if we pay for it this time? How about, you know, we're going to do the food, because we take a lot of urinary blockage cats. You know, how about if we do this? So, you know what, it actually, in a lot of ways, ends up being a wash. Not completely, but there's of course that expense. And we target those veterinarians that can help us. They donate their time. We come up with our own supply. So those are the kinds of things that I used early on to present this idea. And I think the biggest thing, honestly, that was used, at least during our conversation, was if we don't take these cats, their options are limited. I mean, they are. Why not at least give them a chance, not pronounce them dead before they're dead? Because we have to make those decisions every day. Do we take them? Don't we take them? And it actually wasn't a hard sell. It wasn't. And then it's been proven. Because otherwise we'd be down to not taking any cats over the age of 5 who are healthy. Those 15 and older as part of our guys learning as well, the FELVs. So.
Excellent. Diane, I want to thank you so much for presenting today, and thank you again for the support of AniMeals for the sponsorship for today, for Feline Leukemia Day, and I appreciate it for all that you're doing for the cats on the eastern and the western side of Montana here.